Thanks for letting me speak this morning. It's an honor, and very sad to hear about Roger. And I hope you guys continue to hold him in your prayers. And the topic today was, is God real? So I can't imagine a bigger topic than that one. So it's a doozy of an honor to do that topic today. I'm going to hit my timer here, and we're going to keep this under 30 minutes or thereabouts. And if at 30 minutes we're still going, we're just all going to bail and jump out of the parachutes, whether the plane lands or crashes or whatever. But the topic is God real is our topic today. And that is a really big topic. You guys have probably heard it said, ideas have consequences. If you believe something to be true, if you believe that you have allergies, even if you're not allergic to something, your body may influence your mind to have a runny nose. You may actually develop psychosomatic symptoms. Ideas do have consequences. What about the idea about God? Whether or not you believe in God, whether you believe God exists, whether you believe God is real, that's got to be the mother of all ideas. So if ideas have consequences, then the idea, if God is real or God exists, is going to have the ultimate consequences. You can really bet your bottom dollar that what you believe about God and whether you believe God is real or not is going to affect your worldview on life, the afterlife, just the nature of reality in general, how you should live your life, the nature of good and evil, your view on abortion, politics, sex, marriage, society. It may even have deeply, profoundly philosophical consequences about your attitude towards Chick-fil-A. So the idea of God being real is certainly a big, big idea. But let's just ask ourselves for a moment, when we look at that slide there that says, is God real? What do we mean by God? Excuse me, I've got some allergies here. Hopefully it's not just psychosomatic. But anyways, what do we mean by God? By God, presumably, we mean that causal agent that created the universe, that being that made the universe. For today's purposes, that's what we mean by God, the creator of the universe. What do we mean by the universe? Simply everything that we know. Matter, time, space, energy, dogs, cats, chairs, churches, the people here in this church, things like mathematics, science. You know, all these things exist within the box of the universe. So think of the universe as a box. It contains all these ideas that you can possibly think of. But other ideas such as God would be presumably outside the universe. Now, why do I say God would be outside of the universe, the box of the universe, if you will? Because God created the universe. So if your children came to you and they said, Mom, Dad, are kangaroos real? Maybe we're talking a little child, they haven't seen kangaroos. And little kids tend to love things that are furry and can jump and hop. And if they have a little pouch that they can contain their babies in, that's just plain cute. So what would you do to answer that question? You'd say, well, let's look online. Let's go to Google. Let's go to Wikipedia. Maybe you want to get a little more scholarly. You might go to the Encyclopedia Britannica. Maybe you have the Encyclopedia Britannica at home. You'd show them pictures of kangaroos. You'd look into kangaroos. You'd probably discover more about kangaroos than you care to know. But at the end of the day, you could show them about kangaroos. We're talking about an object inside the box, an object inside the universe. Kangaroos can be seen. You could find videos on kangaroos on YouTube. You could maybe even go to the zoo and possibly see a kangaroo. If you were so motivated, maybe you could get the license to buy a kangaroo. And then, like in the cartoons, you could teach it boxing and win some prize fights. So you could demonstrate that that agent or that object, that being, that kangaroo is real. It's a physical entity inside the universe. If your kids asked, are unicorns real? You'd say, well, they're imaginary, they're in fantasy stories, so in the sense that it's an idea in the imagination, it's real, but they're not real physical things in the universe. Again, we're talking about an object inside the universe. But when we ask, is God real? Now we're talking about an object outside the universe. Something, some being, some super powerful, super intelligent, all-knowing, causal agent that has existed prior to the universe, that has existed prior to matter, time, space, and energy. That's what scientists pretty much think the universe is. So we're asking outside the box, what is it that caused the universe? That's a very different question indeed. We are asking who created the box of the universe, and that's a very different question than asking what is inside the box of the universe. So keep that in mind. Just visualize the universe as this box and everything in it, and then we're asking what's outside the box, what's outside the universe, what's outside space, time, matter, and energy. That's where we're at. So is anybody's brain beginning to hurt? If it is, I think maybe Heather could hook us up with some headache medicine, some Excedrin. So today, to answer this question, it's a big question, remember that. It's not my fault, we could thank Roger. But to answer this question, we're going to fly through a dozen really difficult brick wall questions in excess of 100 miles an hour. So remember again, Heather, you're going to get the Excedrin. All right, let's go on to slide number 2, Paula, if you would. And that one, oh, you know what? I can see from all 3 screens. Now I'm beginning to see how things operate around here. So anyways, these are all in sync. Great, all right. So this one is probably pretty scary, the epistemic problem. Now that is a big word, epistemic. In Greek, the word epistemology or epistemic refers to what we know. In philosophy, ontology is what we believe, and then epistemology is how we know. So the epistemic problem is a problem that theologians and philosophers have identified and that they've dealt with and written thousands upon tens of thousands, if not more, books in the last 2,000 years. How do we know there's a God? Again, it's a big question, so we have a big problem, this epistemic problem. Let's go to the next slide, slide number 3. All right, on that slide, you'll see, boy, oh boy, got to put these glasses on. You'll see things like math, geometry, history. Those are all things that exist within the universe. We can ask questions about geometry. Do all squares have 4 sides? Is 2 + 2 4? It's a question about math. We can look at history and archaeology and look at those kind of evidences. We have a laboratory that we could put physical things in, such as kangaroos, cats, or chemical reactions. When we're looking at physical entities, we're talking about things like kangaroos, black holes. We can use a telescope to look at a black hole or a cluster of planets that's influenced by the gravity of a black hole. We could look through the microscope at things like DNA, cells, all those kinds of things. If we asked a question about Superman or something imaginary, presumably we'd be asking, do those things exist within the universe? But what about God? I put God outside the universe, and that's not to say God isn't in the universe, but God is the cause of the universe. So how do we get a telescope to look outside the universe or a microscope to look outside the universe? We're going to have to take a different approach. This is the epistemic problem. We have to make an inference. We have to infer that God is the inference to the best explanation. Because we can't take science outside the universe. Let's move to the next slide. Do you see how I put science inside the universe? Science can't get outside the universe. Scientists will tell you the earliest they can understand and make predictions about the universe is just a few microseconds after the Big Bang. They don't know what happened before the universe began. The universe is, when it began, they call that the Big Bang. We're going to get into that in a moment. Now, scientists can speculate, we think there was another universe prior to our universe, or we think the universe existed forever and didn't need created, or we think the universe created itself, or nothing created the universe. They can make speculations like that. Now, I'm not saying those things are true, but when they do that, they're not doing science, they're doing philosophy. And they're speculating outside the universe. Let's go to the next slide, Heather. Sorry, Paula. So, philosophy is both outside and inside the universe. That's why it's in the middle. We can speculate about things outside the universe. We can make an inference to the best explanation rather than a direct observation, a chemical or a laboratory process or procedure, something that we look at through a telescope or a microscope. So when scientists say, oh, we think such and such caused the universe, they're using philosophy. The scientific method itself is a philosophy. The idea that we can do a chemical reaction under certain carefully controlled conditions, and we can repeat that experiment by different experimenters in different locations, that's the scientific method. That is science, but that is the philosophy of science. So philosophy is the foundation. Science is a discipline built upon philosophy. The scientific method is a philosophy. So it is okay to use philosophy. Scientists use philosophy. You can't not use philosophy. If somebody says, oh, I don't like philosophy, then their philosophy is they don't like philosophy and don't want to use philosophy. But you can't escape it. Anybody need the Excedrin yet? So here we are, we're going to have to philosophize a little bit about God, but that's okay. Scientists have to philosophize about the cause of the universe. Both Christians or theists who believe in God and atheists, those who don't believe in God, they all have to use this inference to the best explanation. They have to use a little bit of philosophy. So that's where we are today. This question is ultimately a question of theology and philosophy if God exists. Let's move to the next slide. What I'm trying to show here, I just wanted to make it clear since we are in church and we're a Christian audience, that when we talk about God being outside the universe, we're talking about God as the causal agent being outside the universe, God the creator. But if we're talking God the Holy Spirit, then God would be present in the universe. And if we're talking God in the person of Jesus Christ, the human being who lived 2,000 years ago, then yes, God's in the universe. In Christianity, we believe that God is immanent, he's in the universe, but he's also transcendent, he's beyond the universe, he's beyond space, he's beyond time, he caused and created all those things. We don't believe that God is the universe, that's pantheism. That would be like the Hindu religion or the various, beliefs that they have in their religion, or like Star Wars, the Force, that would be pantheism. Atheism believes there's no God at all. Pantheism believes God is all, but as Christians, we're theists, and we believe God created all, but he is separate from the creation. So let's move on from here. Heather, you could go to the next slide. Paula, sorry. Heather, Paula. Okay, I get a little dyslexia. 4 out of every 1 person's I hear could have it. Or is it 1 out of every 4? So, but anyways, the cosmological argument, the teleological argument, and the properly basic belief argument. These are 3 arguments we're going to go through at 100 miles an hour here today, and we're doing pretty good on time. There are many arguments we can make for the existence of God. We're just going to deal with 3 of them, very superficially deal with them. You could spend months on each of these arguments. There's books and tons of books written on all 3 of these things by both Christians and non-Christians. When it comes to the cosmological argument, the term cosmological comes from the Greek word cosmos. It means the universe. And this is really the idea that God is the inference to the best explanation for why there is something rather than nothing, that God created the universe. So when we talk about the cosmological argument, we're going to talk about some evidences or proofs that the universe had a beginning, that the universe was created, and that that creator was God. Then we're going to briefly go into the teleological argument. Teleos in the Greek means design. It is the argument of a designer. It's the watchmaker, if you will, argument. It's the idea that God is the best explanation for the order and the design we see in the universe. And then finally, we get into the properly basic belief argument. This is the idea that we all just kind of know there's a creator. If we see a watch, we know there's a watchmaker. But inwardly, Christians have this experience with God. People experience it differently. Some might look up at the stars and say, I can feel God's presence, or I feel the Holy Spirit. People explain it different ways. Some people have had dreams, but even more basic than that, there's just a yearning, an urging in the heart that we know there's a God. Go to the next slide, number 8, please. The first 2 arguments are objective evidence. It doesn't matter how you feel emotionally. Either, There's evidence that God is the creator, God is the designer. You can come to different conclusions, but these aren't things that are based on feelings. These are inferences to the best explanation. So those are objective evidences. It doesn't matter how you feel. The last one is a subjective argument. How you feel in your heart if there is or isn't a God. If someone says, I've witnessed the Holy Spirit in my life, I've witnessed Jesus in my life, let me share with you my testimony about God. That's a subjective argument. And it's okay to have subjective arguments. If we're cooking a dish, we might objectively have a recipe we follow, ingredients that we follow, but then when we eat the meal and describe it to others, we say, look, come, see, taste how good it is. This food is delicious, or this food is bad. So the subjective is a good argument too, especially when you combine it with the objective. So let's go on to the next slide, please, Paula. I got the name right that time. Now we get into the cosmological argument. The cosmological argument is this idea that God created the cosmos, or the universe. Remember we said the universe is a box and God is outside the box? And remember we said that the universe is matter, time, space, and energy. It's all those things. And God created those things. What we need to demonstrate with a cosmological argument is that the universe had a beginning. If the universe didn't have a beginning and it's always been here, then Genesis 1:1 must be wrong. What does Genesis 1:1 say? It says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. In the Hebrew, the word heavens and earth really means everything that's known. Everything here on earth and everything up in the heavens, the sky, the stars, everything. It means the whole universe. So Genesis 1:1 basically says God created everything. So if Genesis 1:1 is going to be right in approximately, leading us towards the truth as we, begin to read the Bible right out the gate, we've got to show the universe has a beginning. It wasn't always that way. Scientists used to believe that the universe was eternal, that it always existed. They had an idea roughly called the steady state theory. The idea was the universe always existed. Well, something has to have always existed. If there's ever such a thing as nothing, where does something come from? Can you close your eyes just for a minute? Can you imagine what nothing is? Would nothing be a big black blob? Or do you have maybe in your mind's eye this idea that nothing is just a white blank sheet of paper? You can open your eyes back up. If you imagined nothing being big and black and a blob, those are attributes. Big is different than small. Black is different than white. A blob is different than something that has sharply defined characteristics. Those are all attributes. Nothing means none of those attributes. Aristotle said, nothing is what rocks dream about. Well, rocks don't dream, and that's probably as good a definition of nothing as anything. So there's no such thing as nothing, is my point, and there's always been something. So we have to ask ourselves, why is there something rather than nothing? What by necessity has always existed? Is it God that has always existed, or is it the universe that's always existed? There is reality. The fact that I'm here before you questioning if we exist or asking why does something exist rather than nothing is evidence that something does in fact exist. So going back to the steady state theory, scientists used to believe that the universe always existed. So if you asked, well, who created the universe? They'd say, you can't ask that question. It's the brute reality. It's just always been there. There's never not been a universe. So it's very important we establish that there is a universe. So the cosmological argument very simply goes just like what's up there on the screen. Go back one. Everything that had a beginning had a cause. The universe had a beginning. That's the Big Bang. And therefore, the universe had a cause. Now let's go to the next slide. There's 5 proofs we're going to go through very quickly. It's an acronym, sure. I put 2 S's in there. The space-time theorems, the second law of thermodynamics, the universe is expanding, the radiation echo of the Big Bang, and finally the philosophical argument, the end of infinite time is impossible. We're going to fly through those very quickly. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, this is a brief screen capture of one of the space-time theorem articles from 2003 written by Arvind Borde, Alan Guth, Alexander Vilenkin. Has anybody ever heard of Stephen Hawking? Stephen Hawking used to write these space-time theorem papers, and since the 1970s, the world's leading physicists would get together and they would discuss what they know about physics in the universe, and they would discuss an area of physical science called cosmology. And they would write papers on the Big Bang. Their paper in 2003 here is Inflationary Space-Times Are Incomplete in Past Directions. What a paper. You'll need Excedrin for that one. What they're talking about is when they look at what they know about the universe through telescopes and through all their research and their mathematics and all the tools they have at their availability in their philosophizing that they use as well, and that's okay. They realize the universe is expanding, and in the past, the universe was much smaller, and as you go back into the past, it gets so small and so dense that time stops, and they don't know what was before time. So you have this timeline of the world expanding, and when they rewind the world, they get to a point where it all shrinks down into an infinitely small, volumeless, super hot, super energetic, timeless, dense, hot seed. And they don't know what happened before that. It's incomplete. So the space-time theorem papers are put out by the leading scientists. And some of them may believe in God, but I think most of them probably don't. I don't know. I haven't talked to them, and that's really not something they always speculate upon. Stephen Hawking, for instance, used to believe in a God, then before his death, he was maybe agnostic, possibly atheistic, but it doesn't matter. The point is, they believe the universe had a beginning. So that is the point to gather here. Leading scientists agree that the universe is expanding, rewind it into the past, it had a beginning, matter, space, time, and energy all had a beginning. Therefore, Genesis 1:1 is back on the menu. Remember, Genesis 1:1 says God created the universe. Here's scientists telling us the universe had a beginning. Let's go to the next slide, Paula. Second law of thermodynamics. This basically says in a closed, isolated system, the amount of usable energy is decreasing. What the little slide is showing there is if you conduct an experiment, let's say you have a flashlight, and in the flashlight you have a battery, you turn it on. The energy in the battery is released in the form of light and heat, and there's some level of efficiency, but it's never perfect efficiency. And when you're done, the energy is drained out of the battery. You lose a lot of that energy in the form of heat, and you have to go take the battery outside of that system, put it in another system, and pour energy in it. There is no exception known to this law. Now, you could keep adding batteries, but you're adding things outside the system. You're always importing a new battery in the system. Let's talk about the box of the universe again. The universe has a limited amount of energy. It's like our flashlight with a battery. If the universe has been here forever and ever and ever, and it is the brute reality, and it didn't need created by God because it had no beginning, and it's always been here, it's never not been here, then wouldn't we have an infinite amount of energy? But the second law of thermodynamics tells us that we don't have an infinite amount of energy, that the amount of usable energy in a closed system is always running down. The universe is a closed system. So the universe is running out of usable energy. The universe began in a big bang. It'll end a cold, dark death, where eventually all the stars are so far away from each other and there's no energy left. Now, God could remake the universe, and that's the promise we see in Jeremiah and Isaiah, but that's a different story. We're just focusing on the beginning of the universe. So here's the point. If the universe is running out of energy, and yet there's so many batteries and flashlights and suns and stars burning and so much energy available today, then if the universe existed forever, it would have run out of its finite amount of energy a long, long time ago. So the universe, in fact, did have a beginning, or else we would have no energy left because we have a finite amount of energy. So the second law of thermodynamics, again, shows that Genesis 1:1 is back on the menu. The universe has a beginning, just as the Bible told us so. Let's go to the next slide. Begins with the universe is expanding. This is the redshift concept. There's an effect called the Doppler effect in physics. If you ever heard a race car, when it's coming towards you, you hear whee, and then as it's going past you, you hear whoom. Why is it a higher pitch when it's coming towards you and a lower pitch when it's traveling away from you? This is an effect called the Doppler effect. The sound waves are literally being compressed as the car comes towards you and being stretched into a lower frequency, deeper sound as it's traveling away. We're kind of familiar with that, race car sound. The redshift effect is similar to the Doppler effect. On the slide here, colors that are redder have a longer wavelength, you can see on the right, and colors that are bluer or more violet in color have a shorter wavelength. There's more energy there. So the universe is expanding, and when scientists look at, say, a particular star, they can break down the component pieces of light, and they can say there's X amount of hydrogen and X amount of helium, and then the spectral lines should look this color or that color. But they see these spectral lines shifted just a little bit over towards the red. Universally, they observe this phenomenon in all directions. So whether you look out this way or that way or this way or that way into the night sky, and you look at stars that you know what they're made of, they're just a little bit more red than they should be. You can't detect it with the human eye, but you can detect it with sensitive instruments. Edwin Hubble in 1929 discovered this redshift and noted that in all directions, equally and uniformly, everything is shifted toward the red. That means things are expanded and things are moving away from each other. The distance between one star and another star is getting greater. Everything's expanding. If it's expanding, then going back in the past, it must have been smaller. So the redshift is another scientific evidence that the universe is expanding. It was smaller in the past. It began at a Big Bang. So here again, we have another evidence that the universe had a beginning. Again, Genesis 1:1 that states in the beginning is back on the menu because at least the universe had a beginning. Let's go back, or let's go to the next slide, please, Paula. This is R, the radiation echo, the Big Bang. In the 1960s, 1964, two scientists at the Mount Wilson Observatory, Penzias and Wilson, had discovered a faint radio echo that they thought was maybe due to a pigeon being on their telescope or some debris or dust up there. They cleaned it up, and they're like, wow, wherever we look into the night sky, we get this faint background, kind of like static. Have you ever seen, like when you, on the older TV sets, you'd switch between channels or get into the UHF spectrum, you get that static? That's cosmic microwave background radiation, a portion of that is. So they noticed that on their telescopes. Now, in the 1980s, this picture was taken by COBE, the Cosmic Background Explorer telescope, and it took this picture, which pretty much put the final nail into the coffin for any doubting Thomases that didn't believe in the Big Bang and didn't believe the universe had a beginning. And the picture that they got of this very weak background radiation behind all other radiation that's uniformly exhibited in all degrees and 360 degrees in the night sky was evidence in the ancient past, it's the oldest thing they can observe, that there was some kind of initial explosive event prior to the universe beginning its early expansion. And so this is basically a picture as close as we can get to the birth of the universe. So the cosmic background radiation is yet another evidence that the universe had a beginning, another evidence that Genesis 1:1, that God created the universe in the beginning, is back on the map. Let's go to the next slide. Anybody need that Excedrin? This is the end of infinite time is impossible. So before the steady state theory, interestingly enough, in the Middle Ages, Muslim philosophers had theorized the universe had to have a beginning. Maimonides, a ancient Middle-aged Jewish philosopher, had a similar interpretation also. They theorized that Genesis 1:1 had to be true, that the universe had to have a beginning, because you couldn't have an infinite number of moments before today, or today would never get here. Another way to look at it is like this. What if I said the distance from here to Texas is infinite? Normally it's like 1,300 miles, take you 19, 20 hours to get there, 18 hours if you got a lead foot maybe. But how long would it take you to get to Texas if the distance was infinite? You'd never get there, right? You could drive for 100 days, you could drive for 100,000 years, and you'd never get there. The distance is infinite. If the distance between here and Texas is infinite, you'll never get there. So if there's an infinite number of moments before the beginning of the Big Bang in today, then today would never get here because you cannot traverse an infinite. So this was a philosophical idea, and it's just very interesting that that idea also bears out to agree with what scientists postulate about reality, namely that the universe, matter, space, time, and energy all had a beginning. So that's where we are. And what does that lead us with? There must be some cause outside the universe that caused the universe. That puts Genesis 1 back on the map. Let's quickly go through. You might have an objection to this. You might say, well, who created God? Now, the answer is God is a necessary being. Something's necessary. Either the universe by necessity exists or God by necessity exists. Let's look at a couple possibilities. Go to the next slide, please. I've got 4 possibilities here. The universe created itself. If you didn't want to believe in God, you could choose that one. Here's the problem. The universe would have to exist prior to the universe existing to create itself. That's logically absurd. So I think we could scratch that one off the list. How about the universe was created out of nothing by nothing? We kind of hit on that earlier. If nothing created the universe, then nothing isn't nothing. Nothing now has an attribute, namely the ability to create matter, space, time, energy, kangaroos, cars, human beings, churches, cats, chairs, etc., etc., etc. So if nothing created the universe, then nothing is the most powerful thing that you can imagine, and that's typically not what anyone would think or any philosopher would allow you to legitimately concede to that belief as a definition of nothing. So nothing ever came from nothing, nothing ever could. So I think we could scratch that one off the list. How about the multiverse? Maybe there's an infinite number of universes prior to our universe, and another universe somehow created our universe, and our universe will again create another universe. The problem with that is, remember the second law of thermodynamics? Our universe is running out of energy. How can our universe that's running out of energy create an infinite number of universes that have all this energy? Where's all the energy coming from? And the other problem is, wouldn't that increase the need for a creator, for a designer? Look at it this way. If you had a train and you have an engine, and that's got the steam engine, and it's got the fuel and the energy, and it's pulling all the little train cars along. Well, if somebody asked you, what's pulling the caboose? What's pulling all those train cars? And you said, well, nothing. Just the caboose is being pulled by the next car, and the next car. There is no engine. It's just one car pulling another car all the way along ad infinity. Well, the more cars you get on the train, the greater the need for a more powerful engine. So to say our universe was created by another universe, created by another universe, and it's just universes creating universes all the way back for infinity, that's really not much of an explanation. You're just arguing for one more car without one more train car without an engine to move the whole thing. So the greater the number of the universes, I think the greater the need for a supreme, causal, super powerful, necessary being agent that by any other name we would call God. Let's go to the next slide. This is a quote by an agnostic astronomer, Robert Jastrow. In 1978, he wrote a book, God and the Astronomers. Now, he's by no means a believer. He started the Goddard Institute of Science and Research, which is established by NASA. And so this is a pretty reputable individual here. He said, for the scientist who has lived by his faith in the power of reason, the story ends like a bad dream. He scaled the mountains of ignorance. He's about to conquer the highest peak. As he pulls himself over the final rock, he's greeted by a band of theologians who've been sitting there for centuries. Again, Genesis 1:1 is back on the map. The universe had a beginning, and God is the best explanation for the universe. It takes more faith, I think, to be an atheist. It takes more faith to believe nobody created everything. It takes more faith to believe that than to believe a super powerful super being created the universe. You don't have to be a mathematician to know nobody times nothing can't equal everything. Now, whether you believe in God or don't believe in God, we all have to make an inference the best explanation. So my question then for you is, what do you think the inference, the best explanation is? Is it God, or is it nobody made everything, or everything was created by itself prior to itself? The universe created itself? Or was it there's an infinite number of universes creating this universe, and it's like that train that has no engine pulling it. It's just one car after another car after another car without a prime mover engine. I think God is the inference, the best explanation, but you can decide. The next argument, we're going to really go through this one fast. The teleological argument is very similar. Every design has a designer. The universe has a highly complex design. Therefore, the best explanation is that the universe and life has a designer, and that would be God. Let's go to the next slide. There are so many finely tuned principles in life. I'll just give you a couple. Oxygen comprises 21% of the atmosphere. If it was higher, fires would spontaneously erupt. If it was lower, life on this planet, maybe save bacteria, would suffocate and die. If the universe was expanding at a rate of 1/1,000,000th more slowly than it is, temperatures in the Earth would be exceeding 10,000 degrees, according to physics. If the gravitational constant, the force of gravity, was altered by 1 part in 1,040, the sun wouldn't exist, the moon would crash into the Earth, and the Earth would shear off into space. If the centrifugal forces of the planets weren't carefully aligned with the gravitational forces, nothing would orbit around the sun. If Jupiter and Venus, these big planets, weren't there in our solar system, they wouldn't be these cosmic vacuum cleaners that would prevent asteroids and meteors from hitting us all the time. If it weren't for the moon, we wouldn't have the tidal forces and the seasons and the carefully controlled climate we have on Earth. If the Earth was too close to the sun, it'd be too hot. It wouldn't spin right. If it was too far away, it'd be too cold. And again, it wouldn't spin right. We're in that just right Goldilocks zone. So there's so many of these fine-tuning factors, and what I'm meaning to show here is just one page, and there's like 50 pages like this of all these fine-tuning factors. Some of them are so incredibly fine-tuned, like gravity, 1 in like 1,000 parts, would be catastrophic for life, that once you begin adding all these things up, you don't need to know some crazy probability, but you just need to say, hey, wow, everything is fine-tuned. And not just for, the universe, but also apparently for there to be life in the universe. This is nature's way of telling us God so loved us, he finely tuned the universe and carefully controlled all these conditions so life would be just right so that we could exist and be here. The question you have to ask is all this fine-tuning an accident, or is there an author, an intelligent author behind it all? When you look at fine-tuning, how about the human genetic code? Humans have about 3 billion base pairs of information that produce about 30,000 gene products or protein products that make up your body and physically are responsible for, your particular genetic code. This genetic code can be read forward. It can sometimes be read backwards, and sometimes it can be read through alternative splicing. Like if you read every third bit of information, you get a different set of programming. That would be like saying I have a book here. If you read it forward, it's the Gospel of John. If you read it backwards, it's a work by Shakespeare. And then if you read every third word, it's Charles Dickens. What kind of intelligent mind would be needed to create and to communicate a code of information that incredible, that complex? When you look at the simplest life, Mycoplasma bacteria genitalium, it is a parasitic infection that lives in the human GI tract. It has about 500,000 bits of information and about 500 gene products or protein products. And it can't even live by itself. It has to have the host of an animal, in this case a human being, to live in. So even the simplest life is so incredibly complex. It has so much information. It stretches credibility, I think, to the breaking point to say an accident rather than an intelligent author is responsible for the design we see in life. So let's get to the next quote. Here's a famous scientist, a contemporary scientist, Sir Fred Hoyle. He's passed away now, but he was a famous astronomer. And he said, a common sense interpretation of the facts suggests that a super intellect has monkeyed with physics as well as chemistry and biology, and that there are no blind forces worth speaking about in nature. So again, the inference, the best explanation about the design we see in the universe and the cosmos and the stars, and the design specifically we see in life is God. Again, Genesis 1:1 is back on the menu. So we've covered the cosmological argument. The universe had a beginning. We've given some different evidences and proofs for that. And we've talked about God is the inference, the best explanation there. When we talk about the design of the universe, that's the teleological argument. God is, again, the best explanation there. Genesis 1:1 is back on the map. Let's conclude this by talking about my final argument. Go to the next slide, please, if you will. The properly basic belief argument. This is a subjective argument in which we all know that there is a God. Go to the next slide, please. We know by what we see, and we know in our hearts there's a God. Paul puts it this way in Romans 1:20. He says, since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that men are without excuse. He's saying we all just know by the fact that the universe exists that there's a God, that he's eternal, that he's powerful, that he's divine, and we know about his divine nature. We know he loves us. We know about right and wrong. There's so many things you could unpack from Paul's statement. And I think there is a sense in which we do know that there is a God. Now, not everybody would agree upon that. We can often become confused and misled by ourselves, by others, or just by a preponderance of information. Maybe I'm confusing a lot of people here today. But the point is that there is an overwhelming number of people who just seem to persist with this idea that there is a God, regardless of the religion. It just seems innate to human experience. People believe there's something beyond. Why does that belief persist? This leads us to a deeper experience that many believers have had. Here I'm talking specifically Christian believers. Some examples of believers that just know in their hearts that God might be real, might be sitting next to you today. Perhaps you could share your testimony with others if the opportunity presents itself today or this week as you refresh yourself and go into this week. But let's first look briefly into history. Let's see what kind of faith and profound belief in God that the Christian martyrs had who came before us. For in these times when the Christians were being martyred in the early church, it was not a huggy bear, kissy-faced, spaghetti dinner faith that they had. And there's nothing wrong with those things, because I especially love spaghetti dinners. But my point is this: the internal witness in their hearts of God's Holy Spirit was so powerful that they were willing to embrace that belief to the point of death. Let's go to the next slide. Now, this can get a little bit morbid here. Let me unpack this for you. That is a picture of, a bust of the, not a bust, a carving of Nero's face. Nero was an emperor, like 54 to 68 AD, he ruled the Roman Empire. And then to the right there is a picture of the Colosseum. That is a painting by a French painter in the 1800s, and it's meant to depict the persecution of the Christians. And you can see the Christians are about to be fed to the lions. Everybody's watching in the Colosseum. And then can you see in the background there the Christians kind of hung up on poles, and they're covered with these tar-pitched outfits, these heavy burlap togas, if you will, that are soaked in tar and pitch and naphtha, which is a semi-volatile chemical compound. Does that look like fun? Who wants to be a Christian? That's what they sometimes did to the early Christians. In fact, Seneca, an ancient historian, tells us that Nero employed this tunic, this toga, if you will, called the tunica molestatia, literally the tunic of molestation. And what they would do to the early Christians what Nero would do, and Nero was crazy, by the way. He was the emperor who burned Rome down. But they would take the Christians, they would put them up on these poles, and they would line the streets. So as people in the Roman Empire went to the games from their homes, and they went to the Circus Maximus, or they went to the Colosseum, like in the picture here, you would see Christians lined up, tied, hung up on poles, and they'd be covered in this heavy, heavy tunic of molestation that had this tar impregnated on it. It's just so hot, and he would sew their mouths shut so they could only breathe through their nose. Now imagine baking in the sun, all day long in that hot sun with the heavy burden of that hot tunic of molestation on with your mouth sewn shut. Then at nighttime, and I apologize about the graphic nature of this, but this is history, Nero would have them lit on fire, but they wouldn't burn quickly. They'd slowly burn to death like carefully controlled human candles under the regulated flame of the semi-volatile tar-soaked garments. Now, would you want to be a Christian in those days? But yet these Christians were lining up doing these things. And when the Black Death had sprung upon the Roman Empire, and people were beginning to die, and everybody was leaving the city and going out into the country, who stayed in the city of Rome and said, let's take care of all the people suffering and the people dying? It was the Christians who had, not too long before the Black Plague had been martyred. So what you see here is this powerful witness to the rest of the world. The Christians are saying, we believe in God. Taste and see how good. Though you persecute us, though you kill us, we are going to comfort and we are going to care for you. No one better describes the great witness and the great faith of the Christians and the deep frustrations that they wrought upon their persecutors than the Roman lawyer Tertullian. Quintus Septimus Florens Tertullianus. He lived about 150 to 220 AD. It's a great name if you're looking for names for your kids. He was converted to Christianity in Carthage, and he turned the sharpness of his legal wit to defend the Christians and taunt their adversaries. He says as follows. He states, the pagans have their own heroes, men willing to die for their country, but if a Christian is willing to suffer for God, he is called a fool. But go to it, my good magistrates. The populace will count you a great deal better if you sacrifice the Christians to them. Torture us, rack us, condemn us, crush us. Your cruelty only proves our innocence. That is why God suffers us to suffer all this. But nothing whatever is accomplished by your cruelties, each more exquisite than the last. It is the bait that wins men's souls for our school. We multiply whenever we are mown down by you. The blood of Christians is the seed of the church. That very obstinacy with which you taunt us is your teacher. For who beholds it and is not stirred to inquire what lies indeed within it? Who on inquiry does not join us, and joining us does not wish to suffer, that he may purchase for himself the whole grace of God? That's a pretty awesome quote. And you can see there the belief that those Christians had was so powerful to the point of death. And it was a contagious belief. And they weren't just believing in some happy-go-lucky thing. These were the grandchildren, the great-grandchildren of the disciples who had seen Jesus, talked to Jesus, witnessed, the miracles in the early church. They died for profound theological beliefs. They had a profound inward witness of God, an inward witness of the Holy Spirit. They were willing to die for it. But don't just look at those subjective beliefs. There's a lot of people who are martyrs maybe for very different beliefs. Look at those subjective beliefs of the early Christian and martyrs in combination with the objective beliefs I've given today, with the cosmological and the teleological argument. And then maybe as you talk to some people in the church or some people that you've known just in the community, and they talk to you about why they believe in Jesus, don't be afraid to listen. There's powerful things to be learned when someone says, hey, taste this food. It's so good. Let me tell you why I'm a Christian. Don't be afraid to tell others why you're a Christian. Your testimony isn't any better or any worse than the next person's. Just tell people what you believe and why. So let me ask you this. When it comes to this properly basic belief in God, would you really rather be around somebody who doesn't believe in God or someone who does believe in God? What about atheism, the idea that nobody made everything? How sweet do you think that would taste? Would you like to be around people that believe in God and believe in worshiping God with all your heart, and in the second part of that, loving your neighbor as yourself, people who don't want another cup of themselves, but they want another cup of you, and they want another cup of you. Those are the kind of people you would want to be surrounded by, and that's what I think we in this church have to offer. We want to be filled with a cup of you, not a cup of ourselves. Christians are self-sacrificing people, worried more about their neighbor than themselves. So remember the objective evidence as well. Christianity is not only the most delicious and sweet way, but it's also the most sensible way. So that's my argument for today. I guess we did go a little over. But remember the objective evidences. There's a beginning to the universe, there's a design to the universe, and there's also a witness in the human heart and a witness from your neighbors about how God is real. So is God real? You have to decide for yourselves. May God bless you and keep you as you seek after the truth and love God with all your heart and with all your soul and all your mind and all your strength. And may God bless you and keep you as you love your neighbor as yourself. Thank you very much, and you guys have a great day.